I'm so glad that wasn't recorded. Good evening. I hope you are all doing well. Maseches Megillah Daf Chaf Beis. We are starting 4 lines from the bottom. Let's make that, yes, exactly 4 lines from the bottom. Oh, is that 5 lines from the bottom? 4 lines. So in case you thought for a moment that Hashem didn't love you, today is Rosh Chodesh, and what is the very first sugya we're discussing? Rosh Chodeshim V'chulol Shemoed Koren Arba. We're going to be discussing the details of Rosh Chodesh and other halachos as well. But today's daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, is the daf that discusses how we started to lane the laning for Rosh Chodesh with what we call doleg, by reading that third pasuk twice, once for the first aliyah, and then v'amarta lahem, as well as the beginning of the second aliyah. All of that is in today's daf. What?
David Myers pointed out to me this morning that pasuk v'amarta is likely the most laid pasuk in Torah.
Yeah.
Saying
right?
Every month it's
Every
twice.
month.
And then during the regular.
Every month it's twice,
That's it.
and on a Rosh Chodesh it's 4 times. On a double Rosh Chodesh it's 4 times,
right.
2 days.
Just a trivia question.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. That for sure. That's not a repetitive
But
pasuk.
para,
A repetitive singular pasuk. Yeah, very good. So the Gemara is going to discuss these details. A question was posed to Rava. Parshas Rosh Chodesh, Ketzad Koranosa. You wake up this morning, you start Daf Yomi, perfectly timed. Parshas Rosh Chodesh, Ketzad Koranosa. How do we do the laning? We know, of course, that the primary pasuk that we start with is Tzabes B'nei Yisrael V'amarta Lehem Es Korbani Lachmi, and that whole sugya, that parsha of psukim, and a parsha is considered from a psucha to a psucha, or stuma to stuma, or psucha stuma, or stuma psucha, a section of Torah in one block of language, of one block of words. That section is Dahavya Tmanya Psuke. It's 8 psukim, but we know that there's a minimum of 3 aliyahs. So how do we lay 3 psukim over 8 aliyahs? Hechi na'avet. Do we say, Nikre, that we should read Trey, the first 2 people are tlasa psukim, that the first two aliyahs, the Kohen and the Levi, each get 3 psukim. However, if that's true, pashulahu Trey, that leaves us over with 2, and that's problematic because for the third aliyah, we need to have another pasuk. Vein mishayrin the parsha pachos mishlosha psukim. You can't leave over these 2 psukim. That doesn't work. So if you want to say, fine, maybe we need to read more than just this parsha. Nikre arba, but maybe we should have the Kohen lane 4. We'll have the Levi lane 4, and then we'll move into the next sections of the Torah. Pashulahu shiva. The next 2 sections together are 7. How are those next 2 sections 7? The section of Uvyom HaShabbos Havyan Trey, that's 2 psukim, and Uvroshe Chodashim Havyan Chamisha Sehechinavi. How then still should we read the psukim in order to properly lane on Rosh Chodesh? So it says the Gemara, maybe we should say that for that aliyah Nikri Trey Meha, we should read 2 psukim from the section of Uvyom HaShabbos, V'chad Mehanach, and 1 from the section of Rosh Chodeshechem. So the Gemara says that can't be as we turn to the top of Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, because in Maschilin beParsha Pachos Mishlosh Psukim, once we go into a fresh parsha, a fresh collection of psukim in the Torah, you're not allowed to stop an aliyah within the first 3 psukim. Not allowed. Okay, says the Gemara, likri treme havitzlasa mehach. Maybe we should read 2 psukim from Uvyom HaShabbos. There only are 2 psukim in that little section in the Torah, and we should read 3 from the section of Rosh Chodeshechem, and that way we have 5 psukim, and we haven't violated the previous mentioned halacha that says that you have to lay in at least 3 psukim into an aliyah. That's perfect. Says the Gemara, that has its own problem, because that whole section of Rosh Chodeshechem only has 5 psukim. And if you read 3 psukim into 5, how many are left? Pashulahu Trey, then only 2 psukim are left, but that's a problem too. Why? Because you can't leave over 2 psukim. You can't be within 3 psukim of the end. You can't end an aliyah there. That's not appropriate. Amar lo. So what does Rava say back? I want you to understand the context and history here. This is such an important historical point. Rava was a 4th century Amora. That means that he lived in the late 300s. And by that time, they did not know how to lane Rosh Chodesh. Rava says, Amar lo, zulo shamati. I don't know. However, kayotze ba shamati, you know what? Taka, I heard a similar sugya, and maybe we can learn from the similar sugya back to Rosh Chodesh. What's the similar sugya? Well, we learned about this already, Maseches Tainis, about the Ma'amados, that when the Korbanos were brought, in addition to the Mishmar, where you had Kohanim who had responsibilities in the Beis HaMikdash, there were Yisraelim who had responsibilities of laning wherever they lived, and they would lane from Parshas Breshis, and we detailed this in the previous Masechta. And there we saw the following, Ditna. The Mishnah writes, Bayom Harishon, on Sundays, the first Mishmar, the group of the Ma'amados, the people in the cities, what would they do? They'd lane Bereshis and Vayhi Rakia, those two parshios. The Tani Allah, and the way that we would break down the laning, we learned on this Mishnah, we had a brisa that says Bereshis Bishnayim. We would have two people get aliyahs for the section of Bereshis. We'd split it into two, and Yehi Rakia be'echad. And the second section of Yehi Rakia would be the third aliyah. But when we analyze it, the Gemara says that's not so simple. I understand that Yehi Rakia, that second section for the Sunday's laning of the Ma'amados, all of that should be read as one unit because it's 3 psukim. Perfect. Ella, the first part I don't understand. Bereshis bishnayim. How could you have 2 aliyahs with the first section of Bereshis? After all, chamisha psuke havu. It's 5 psukim. How do you break up 5 psukim? Vitanya, and we have a brisa that says, "Hakore b'Torah lo yivchos mishlosh psukim." You're never allowed to lane less than 3 psukim. So this is what the Gemara was bothered by. The Gemara is bothered by the fact that if you take the first section of Bereshis, it's 5 psukim before the first break, and you're giving 2 aliyahs out. How does each person get 3 psukim? How does it work? So really, what the Gemara is saying is that this is actually our question by Rosh Chodesh, because we have in the second and third parshios of Rosh Chodesh, Yom HaShabbos and Rosh Chodshechem, we have 7 psukim, and then the last section we have 5 psukim, right? Rosh Chodshechem is 5 psukim. How do we break that up? So it says the Gemara that we had learned in Maseches Tainis v'itmar Allah. We learned over there, Rav Omar Doleg, Ushmuel Omar Posek. Rav says that we are Doleg. Normally the word Doleg means to skip. And here it actually means to repeat. So we lane by the Ber Hashem and Moshe Limor, Tzabes b'nei Yisrael v'Maratal, Emes Korban Yilach Midishai, Reach Nichochi Tishmeru, Lakriv Livim Moado. And then here's our key pasuk. V'Amarta Elohem, Zeh ha'isha asher takrivu la'Hashem, la da 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 da, Shnaim layom ala samid. And then when we lane the second aliyah, we go back to the beginning of that pasuk. That's called Doleg. So what Rav is saying is that we repeat that third pasuk in Chumash so that it functions as the last pasuk of the first aliyah. And the first pasuk of the second aliyah, that's called Doleg. So that's what Rav says. So Shmuel Amar Posek. Shmuel says, no, we cut the pasuk in half. In the pasuk, there's a trop called Esnachta. When I was learning to lane, we used to call it the wishbone because it kind of looks like a wishbone. It has the little prongs on the bottom. So then, no, we just stop right there. We stop in the middle. Shmuel says we break the pasuk in the middle. Rav Amar Doleg, 12 lines down, 10 lines down, Chav Beis Minal. Rav says we repeat that third pasuk and it functions as the last of the first and first of the second. My time alo Amar Posek, why doesn't he say like Shmuel to split the pasuk in half? Says the Gemara, because Kasava Rav is of the opinion that kol psuko de lo paske Moshe anan lo paskinan le. That if Moshe broke down the pasuk in a specific way, who are we to say any differently? Shmuel Amar Paskinan. He doesn't hold of that principle, and he holds that you are allowed to read a pasuk only in pieces. So therefore, instead of repeating the whole third pasuk, what Shmuel does is he just breaks it in half. However it breaks out, that's what he would do. That's how he would read it only in pieces. Says the Gemara, the Amr Reb Chananya Kara, Reb Chananya the reader. Rav Chananya was he was about Korah. He was the guy in Shul. So he said there was Tsar Gadol Hayali Eitzel Rabbi Chanina Hagadol, different person, Chananya and Chanina, and he wanted to split up the psukim because he was a Rebbe. He wanted to teach the kids. He wanted to split up the psukim into smaller pieces. So this is a kasha on Shmuel because we see from Rav Chananya Kara that the only time it's permissible to read a pasuk in pieces is when you're doing it for the sake of teaching Talmud Torah to children. But what does that mean? That on Rosh Chodesh, and what does that mean by the Ma'amados? It means that you can't split a pasuk in half, Shmuel. You're not allowed to do that. So how does the Gemara answer this? Hasam time of mine over there. Why is it that by Rav Chananya Kara that we said that we're allowed to break a pasuk in half? That's because Mishum Delo Efshar. We have no choice. Children can only retain so much information. We have to break up the psukim into pieces. This is the study of how to teach people. You have to know. Rabbi Noach Orlovik had a great line. He says, the skill of the teacher is inversely proportionate to the age of the child. For me to speak to my peers, no big deal. For me to speak to a 5-year-old, I have to start to think like a 5-year-old. That's a skill. The older you are, the harder it gets because you're further and further away from that moment. So that's what Rabbi Orlovik said, is that the skill of the teacher is inversely proportionate to the age of the child. Brilliant. Great line. Anyways, here he says, what am I supposed to do? So he got the kula by the kids because lo efshar, there was nothing else he could have done. That's how the kids have to learn. So what does Shmuel say? Hachanami lo efshar. Here too, by the laning, we have to split that middle pasuk. We don't have a choice. We have to split it in half. That was his opinion. All right, let's switch over to Shmuel's opinion and see why he doesn't hold like Rav. Who Shmuel Amar Posek, Shmuel who says that we split the third pasuk. My time alone Amar Doleg. Why doesn't he say that we repeat that third pasuk and have it be a part of both aliyahs? Says the Gemara, Shmuel rejects that possibility because we're concerned about those who are coming in and those who are going out. What's the concern about those who are going in? So if somebody walks in late on Rosh Chodesh, right after Rishon, and he sees that they're starting with Amarta Allahem, so that he'll reverse engineer. That means that the first two psukim was Vaydaber Hashem El Moshe Lemor, pasuk 1, number 2, Tzabes B'nei Yisrael, and then that pasuk ends, and all of a sudden he looks at Sheni, and they're starting at Yamarta Allahem. He's like, Shegit, they didn't do it right. That's the nichnas. And what's the yot?
You walk in at 7 o'clock.
Unbelievable. Yeah. That's awesome. Truth. That was a very truthful statement. But the other problem is for the yosin. Is let's say that the guy walks out after Rishon. They lane by Daber, they lane Sabbath B'nai Yisrael, they lane by Marta Lahem. There's only 2 psukim left in the parsha. Nachashegets. The guy walks out after Rishon. He's like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He left over 2 psukim. That's not allowed. So that's Gzerim Mishum Hanichnasin and Mishum Hayotzin. However, a third of the way down, Chav Beis Manal, both of these shitas are problematic. Both Rav, who says we repeat that middle pasuk, and the shita of Shmuel, who says that we split the pasuk in half. Meisvei. We know Parsha Shel Shisha Psukim Karna Sabashnaim. That's the easy peasy stuff. You have 6 psukim, 2 people for an aliyah, 3 and 3 perfect. V'shel Chamisha Psukim. Oh, what if it's 5? Beautiful. We have a Tanaic source to reflect on how we should look at Rav and Shmuel. What should we expect? Well, if you're Rav, we should expect Doleg, and if you're Shmuel, we should expect Posek. Yet we see none of that in the Brisa. What does the Brisa say? B'yachid. One guy gets the aliyah. All right, let's continue and finish this. Kara Rishon Shlosha, Hasheni Koresh Shnaim mi Parsha Zu ve'echad mi Parsha Acheres. And if you really needed to break it up into 2, fine. What you would do is the first guy would get 3 psukim, and the second guy would read 2 psukim, the 2 remaining psukim of the 5, and then he'd lane 1 pasuk ve'echad mi Parsha Acheres. Now we learned above that not everybody holds that way. Says the Gemara, you're right. One sheet on the Tanaim doesn't, but this one will. V'yesh omrim b'shlosha. Some say that when you read into the next parsha, you can't only read 1. That's not allowed. You have to read 3. Why? Now, v'imisa, if in fact it's true that Rav and Shmuel have teeth to their shitas, then I don't understand. Laman damar doleg nidlog, u'laman damar posek nifsok. This Brisa quoted our case. We have 5 psukim and 2 aliyahs, and it did not recommend what Rav said, and it did not recommend what Shmuel said. 0 for 2. And Rav and Shmuel, Rav is allowed to actually argue on a brisa. Technically, Rav is allowed to. Rav Tanahu Upalig, because he was part of a very special, small group of people called the Dor HaMa'avar, the transitionary generation from Tanaim and Amoraim. However, that's not the Gemara's answer. The Gemara totally pivots and says as follows, halfway down, Shiny Hasam de Afshar Behachi. Over there in that brisa, when it told you how to solve that problem, when you can read the last 2 psukim of 1 aliyah and then go into the next section of reading either 1 or 3, because you could solve that, you could do that. We couldn't do that over here. So therefore, we had to resort to the options of either Doleg according to Rav or Posek according to Shmuel. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Shuban Levi, Halacha ki yesh omrim. What does that mean? So if we look up 3-4 lines, it says v'yesh omrim shlosha. That means that we paskin in halacha that when one does end 1 parsha and go into another section of the Chumash, you're not allowed to end an aliyah within 3 psukim. It has to be 1, 2, 3 and then stop, but not 1, 2 and then stop. That's not allowed. And as well, and this is going to require, is this the hard one? I can't remember. Let's see. No, this one's not so bad. Just like you're not allowed to start an aliyah, you can't start within 3. So too, you cannot leave over at the end of your aliyah less than 3 psukim. You can't leave 1 pasuk. You can't leave 2 psukim. So says the Gemara, this statement of Rabbi Tanchum in the name of Rabbi Shuban Levi was unnecessary. Pshita. I don't need you to make the jump for me. I understand. Once you say in the beginning, in the Resha, that you're not allowed to start laning from pasuk 2, from pasuk 1, you have to start from pasuk 4, right? Once I know that, I should know the same thing about not ending an aliyah at that point. Why is that obvious? Hashta, because where did we see our machlokas between the Tanakama who said you could read into the next parsha 1 pasuk, and then the Yesh Omrim that said 3 psukim? So it says the Gemara, Hashta, Umay Ischalta, in the beginning of an aliyah, the Kamekil Tanakama, and Machmire Yesh Omrim, where the Tanakama there said that he allows for reading only one pasuk into the next parsha, and Yesh Omrim or Machmir there. Shiur at the end, where even the Tanakama is not Mekel. There, the Machmir Tanakama, Lo Kol Shekain the Machmire Yesh Omrim, everyone should know that, meaning that you don't need to tell me this obvious statement that just like in the beginning, we're not allowed to start an aliyah with less than 3 psukim from the beginning. You also can't, and that should be obvious. Says the Gemara. Mahu detema nichnas and shchichi. You might have said that those who come in late are common, but yosin lo shchichi. But those leaving early is uncommon. Why? Demanche sefer Torah v'nafke. Lo shchichi demanche sefer Torah mashke. It's not v'nafke. It's not common for people to walk out during laning. Kamash malan that both of them are common. Coming to shul and leaving early, both of them are prevalent. Okay, we don't need a Gemara to tell us that.
You can't leave when the Sefer Torah is being read.
But so what the Gemara says is that was the Havamina. We would have thought that Yotzin lo shchiche demanche sefer Torah v'nafke, that it's not common for people to leave while the sefer Torah is out. Kamash malan. Maybe they're leaving between aliyahs. I don't know. It has to be something mutter, like you're not allowed to walk out in the middle of a laning. The Torah has to be in between aliyahs, and there's like this is in Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Brewers. These are discussions in halacha, but you're raising a good point. Nevertheless, the Gemara still says that we equate those who come to shul late with those who leave shul early. And so that's what the Gemara seems. It's not musar. I'm just saying what the Gemara, just the way the Gemara plays out. Says the Gemara, there are 3 lines before the middle with lines with Tanakama. My shna shiure delo. Why is it that by the Tanakama, when it comes to ending an aliyah, that he doesn't have a lenient opinion of allowing one pasuk to remain? Mishum yotzin, he's concerned about people who leave early. So says the Gemara, schule nami gzera mishum hanichnasim. If that's true, if you're concerned about nichnasim v'yotzim, so why is it that by the beginning of the pasuk you weren't makbid? There you said even one pasuk you can wrap around to be part of the next parsha with one pasuk. So Amre man da'ayil shiule shail. Here's the difference in psychology between one who comes late to shul and one who leaves early. And I don't know if this is a halachic thing. Again, it's not a social thing. The Gemara says that those who come a little bit late, they don't like being late. So shiule shal, they're going to ask what happened in laning. Now remember, we're blessed. We have chumashim that delineate where Rishon Sheni. They didn't have that, and they were relying on the Baal Koreh to be the. So he stopped when he stopped. When somebody makes a mistake like that, we correct them. No, 2 more psukim. Or when they think that they're supposed to lane, and then they're like da 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 da. They come in to end. They go back and repeat the last word, which is unnecessary because you already finished the laning. The trap's not magical, so leave it be. It says the Gemara, when someone walks in late, shiule shay shalach le rabba bereder rabba the Rav Yosef hilchas samai. How do we paskin? Now this Gemara is asking a two-part question. It's asking how do we paskin in regards to ma'amados? How do we read them? And by extension, it's also asking how do we lane Rishon and Sheni on Rosh Chodesh? Says the Gemara, Shalach le hilchas hadoleg. We paskin like Rab that the pasuk of Ve'amarta lehem is doleg. It is a repeated pasuk. It is both the last pasuk of Rishon and it is as well the first pasuk of Sheni. Then Tzai Dolgan, the pasuk that gets repeated, is that middle pasuk that spans all 5 psukim. Again, a perfect overlap with Rosh Chodesh. It says the Gemara, Zehaklal kol sheyesh b'musaf ibaylehu. What is the Gemara going to talk about now? Tainis tzibur bekama. Our Mishnah seems to have omitted a tainis tzibur where we know that we lane tainis tzibur all the time. So what's the deal? How many aliyahs does it get? So there's a chakira to be made. Rosh Chodesh u'moed korban musaf arba. We know that when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, when it comes to a moed where there's a korban musaf on that day, that there's 4 aliyahs. Aval heicha daleka korban musaf lo. Should we assume that when there's no korban musaf that there isn't a 4th day? There isn't a 4th aliyah, and therefore maybe by a tainis tzibur it should only be 3. Oh, dilma hachanami ika musaf tefillah. Okay, there's no korban musaf, but we do have an addition added to our tefillah, which is the bracha of anenu that we add in. We learned about that in the previous Masechta as well. So maybe we should assume that because there's something that's added to the siddur, that therefore we should have some type of extra 4th aliyah, something. So says the Gemara, we have to answer this question. We don't know if by a tainis tzibur there are 3 aliyahs or if there are 4. 10 lines from the bottom, 3 lines into the middle with lines, 4 lines actually. Says the Gemara, Tashma, let's see. Let's try to make a diuk from our Mishnah. We learned Baroshe Chodashim B'chulo Shemot Koran Arba. So let's make a diuk. Habatainus Tzibor Gimel. Maybe we should just assume very simplistically that there's room for a diuk, but there should only be 3 aliyahs when it comes to a tainus tzibur. Says the Gemara, it can't be that's an available diuk. Why not? Because says the Gemara, Ema Resha, because earlier in the Mishnah, what did it say? It said B'sheni uvechamishi ubeshabes b'mincha korin gimel. What's the diuk from there? Okay, maybe the diuk from there is ha tainis tzibur arba. So when you have a scenario where one Mishnah can give off two implications that are opposite and conflicting, the Gemara is going to say the following line: you are making an inference in a space where you're not supposed to be making an inference. Not everything needs to be a diuk. Not everything. And here, not to say that there shouldn't be a diuk, there should be and there will be. But here, what basically is happening is that it was inappropriate for one to learn the Mishnah this way, and one should not make such a diuk. So let's try answer number 2 again. How many aliyahs are there in a tainis tzibur? Says the Gemara Tashma. Great story. The Rav ikla leBavel b'tainis tzibur. Rav was in one of the batei medrash in Bavel during a tainis tzibur. Kamkara b'sifra, they got up to lane. Pasach barich. For the opening of the aliyah, a bracha was made. Chasim, but at the end of the aliyah, v'lo barich, there was no bracha that was made. And now the next line we're going to read now, but we're going to discuss it at length later today. Nafu kule alma an paihu. Everybody fell on their faces. They were saying tachanun of some kind, something. The Rav lo nafal al ape. We'll get back to this line later. The Rav did not fall on his face. So says the Gemara, let's analyze this. Michli. Rav b'Yisrael kara. Rav was the third aliyah. Rav is a Yisrael. Rashi says that he was not a Kohen, he was not a Levi. So my taima, if he was the Yisrael, my taima chasim v'lo barich. Why didn't he make a bracha after his aliyah? Now, historical note. Before a takana was put into place, the minhag of laning was that the first person would make an aliyah, would make a bracha of the first bracha, and then only the last person would make the closing bracha. Only one set in full of the birchos of the aliyah were ever made. Then we had a takana put into place that every ola was allowed to say Asher Bachar Banu before and Asher Nasan Lanu afterwards. Now Rav was living in a very, very early generation. Again, the Dora Ma'avar, the very first generation of Amoraim, and this takana had not yet been put into place. So if Rav was a Yisrael, and Rav was therefore the third aliyah, so therefore it must be that if he didn't make a bracha afterwards, that there was a fourth aliyah, because we only make a closing bracha after the fourth aliyah. So that means if Rav got shlishi, he was the most chashuv in the room as it relates to being Yisrael, and he got the Yisrael aliyah. So therefore, it must be lav mishum debay lemikra acharina basrei. It must therefore be that somebody had an aliyah after him. So by virtue of the fact that Rav was not the one making a bracha after his aliyah, that shows us that there's another aliyah. Says the Gemara, lo, you've made an error. Check this out. Rav b'kahane kara. Rav got the Kohen aliyah.
Is that why he made the bracha at the beginning?
Very good. Rav made a bracha at the beginning and not at the end, and it fits perfectly. Because before the takana was instituted, the Kohen would make the opening bracha, but he wouldn't close it. Only the shlishi guy would make a bracha after. Fits perfectly. That's it. The Gemara is going to say your language almost the same, except not in English, but it will say the same exact idea. Rav b'kahane kara, and there's precedent for that. To Rav Huna kara b'kahane. Rav Huna also got the Kohen aliyah. So says the Gemara, cute answer. Let's analyze and see if it makes sense. 5 lines from the bottom. Bishlama Rav Huna kari b'kahane. I could understand that Rav Huna is going to get this very special aliyah. To ha'afilu Ravami v'Ravasi to kahane. Even Ravami and Ravasi, who were themselves kohanim and chashive da'ari Yisrael, and they were the holy ones of Eretz Yisrael. They were one of the greatest of the rabbanim. Meikav kaifu le Rav Huna. They were kafuf. They would subjugate themselves to Rav Huna, recognizing that Rav Huna was the Gadol Hador and that they were in the concentric ring around him, but not the Gadol Hador. Ela Rav, but when it comes to Rav did not think of himself as a Gadol Hador. Ha'ika Shmuel de Kahana Hava v'diber alei. Shmuel was a Kohen, and Rav gave him that kavod v'diber alei. He spoke of him very, very highly, which means how can Rav get Kohen? I could understand by Rav Huna. Everyone agrees Gadol Hador. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, everybody agrees Gadol Hador. But what happens when you're not the Gadol Hador? How can you get Kohen? So says the Gemara, it's not really true. Really, Shmuel Nami Mekav Haba Kaif Leila Rav. Really, Shmuel would subjugate and tip his hat to Rav and say, Rav, you are greater than I am. But Rav was just a mensch. Rav who the Avad Lebe Kavod. He gave him Kavod, but really Rav was greater. And when he was in front of him, he gave him that Kavod. When he wasn't in front of him, he recognized his own role, and he was willing to take the Kohen Aliyah. And Hachinami Mistabra, the Rav Bekahane Kara, beautifully said by Rav, because that's what the Gemara says. It must be logical, says the Gemara, that Rav accepted the Kohen Aliyah. The Isal Kadaitach Be Israel Kara. If he got Shlishi, Lefaneha, my time of Barich. Otherwise, why would you be saying the bracha beforehand if you got shlishi? Before the takana, there's no reason to make a bracha beforehand if you're shlishi. Only one person makes that bracha, and that is the person who gets kohen. Therefore, Rav must have gotten kohen. And if that's true, by the way, then it also means that Rav didn't get shlishi, and we therefore can't infer that there was another aliyah. So where we stand right now with the Gemara is that there were only 3 aliyahs, or we don't know really how many aliyahs there were for a Tainus Tzibur. So it says the Gemara, that's not true. That's not true that the only way he would have made a bracha beforehand is if he got kohen. Maybe it was la'achar takana. Maybe the takana was instituted right then by Rav. Then really every aliyah got before and after. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense at all, because ihachi, if that's true, then la'acharei nami livrich. You said that Rav didn't make a bracha afterwards. If there was a takana in place, so you make a bracha before and not after. So you can't argue that there's a takana in place and therefore he got shlishi and said the bracha before but didn't say the bracha after. You have to say the bracha after the takana. So then how could you say that Rav didn't say the bracha afterwards? Says the Gemara, Shiny, Heicha de Yosef Rav. Rav was the exception and not the rule, even when the takana was instituted. So now let's say what the Gemara is saying is that the takana is in place. So I got an aliyah this morning. I said Asher Bachar Banu before. There was a laning. And then I said a bracha afterwards, like everybody else does. That's a takana. What about Rav? Rav was different. So says the Gemara, Rav is not normal, even when the takana is in place. The me'al ayle, because people might come into the shul, but meipak lo nafke, they will definitely not leave the shul, not with him around. Rashi says the Gemara, meipak lo nafke hilkach lefaneha barich. Why did he make the bracha beforehand, even when he got whatever aliyah he got? Gzeira mishumay nechnasim kide amrinan le'el. And la'achareh lo barach lo chayish liyotzet. The whole reason why the takana was put into place of saying these 2 brachos was because of the nechnasim liyotzet. But when people will show up into shul and they may have a misunderstanding of what was what in halacha, it's not so clear. So that's why the Gemara says this. We basically have no way to learn so far with answer number 2. We have no way of knowing whether or not a Tainus Tzibur, which is our question, whether or not a Tainus Tzibur has 3 or 4 aliyahs. Let's try again. Top line, Chav Beis and Beis. Says the Gemara, Tashma Zehaklal. Kol sheyesh bo betel malacha la'am kigon Tainus Tzibur v'Tisha B'Av Koren Gimel. This seems pretty black on white. Here it says very clearly that it's a Tainus Tzibur, and because there's Bittul Malacha, because people have to go to work, the day is very, very busy. So because there's Bittul Malacha, so therefore, says the Gemara, there's only 3 aliyahs. But a day where there is no betel malacha, I don't know about you guys. Today was a very long day at work. I don't think that there's such a thing as no betel malacha on Rosh Chodesh nowadays. Maybe, yeah, betel malacha. Says the Gemara, v'chulo shel moed koren dalet. So then they should have 4 aliyahs. Shma mino. Very, very simple. Why did the Gemara go through this whole dance and song and dance to come up with this very, very simple brisa? Okay, let's continue. Omar Rav Ashi, v'ha'anan lo tnan hachi. That's not what it says in our Mishnah. Ditnan. That's what at least it should say here. Ditnan. What did we say? We said zehaklal, not like you said above. Zehaklal. Here are the rules about how many aliyahs to get. Kol yom sheyesh bo musa ve'eno yom to koren arba. If you have a day that has a korban musa but no iser malacha, then it gets 4. La'asuye mai. What does that come to imply? Lav la'asuye tainus tzibur v'tisha b'av. Doesn't that come to include tainus tzibur where really there's 4? Says the Gemara, if that's true, the Rav Ashi must need some money. According to Rav Ashi, if he were to say such a thing, so then who would be the author of such a brisa? Lo Tanakama v'lo Rabbi Yossi, because what do they hold? Let's take a look at this brisa. The Tanya, the brisa writes in regards to Tisha B'av. Chalios, if Tisha B'av falls out b'sheni v'chamishi on a Monday or on a Thursday, Koren Gimel Maftir Echa, there's 3 aliyahs with Maftir. B'shlishi v'revi, if Tisha B'av falls out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, Kore Echad, only 1 ola, which we never do. Maftir Echad, and then someone does Maftir. Rabbi Yossi Omer La'olam Koren Gimel Maftir Echad, and if that's true, then we see that it should be 3 aliyahs and not 4, because it says very clearly that it should be a Tainus Tzibur. We're talking about Tisha B'av, and it should be Koren Gimel. So says the Gemara, if that's true, then we don't understand what Zeh HaKlal means. Velakasha, a third of the way down, Velakasha, Zeh HaKlal. We don't understand what the Zeh HaKlal means. Says the Gemara, La'asuye mai, Lav La'asuye Rosh Chodesh u'moed. Doesn't that come to teach us about Rosh Chodesh and about the Moed? Says the Gemara, that's ridiculous. Of course, the Zeh HaKlal doesn't teach us that, because Rosh Chodesh and Moed are explicitly spoken about in the Brisa, even the Mishnah. So says the Gemara, what is this zehaklal? Simna be'alma yahiv. Here, it doesn't mean to include a very particular case. It was just to make sure, to reinforce the fact that we should know what the halacha is. The lo tema, that we should never say that Yom Tov v'chulo shel moed ki hadadininu, that a day of Yom Tov and a day of Chol Hamoed, that they're similar. We should never say such a thing. Ella, what was the point of this zehaklal? It was to say the following: Nekotai klala biyodcha. Take the following rules in hand. Kol de tafile milsa mechavre. Any day that has one leg up on its friend, tafile gavra yisera. It also has more aliyahs on that day. Hilkach. Rosh Chodesh u'moed. When it comes to Rosh Chodesh and the Moed, dika korban musaf koran arba. That on those days when there's a korban musaf but no isser malacha, so then we have 4 aliyahs, different than a regular weekday, because a regular weekday doesn't have musaf. But Yom Tov, when it's a Yom Tov on top of musaf, the asr b'asiyas malacha. So now there's asiyas malacha and korban musaf. So then we add 2 aliyahs to the basic regular day, which is chamisha. But Yom Kippurim the anush kares, where there's a special onush of kares, we take our weekday of 3 and add the 3 additional causes of musaf and what was the second one? Musaf, Isser, Malacha, and Kares, and that's Shisha. That's why on Yom Kippur we lay in 6. And Shabbos, the Ika Isser Skila Sheva, so we add a 4th one. Okay, so basically, the kids are there's three aliyahs when it comes to a tainis tzibur. The Gemara says halfway down, going back to a discussion that we had on the previous page about nefilas apayim, and we're going to learn a very important halacha called even maskis about kneeling down or prostrating oneself over rock or stone that is on the floor of a beis medrash. A huge nafkamina lamaisa in this very beis medrash that we had before they put in the carpet, because that was all cement. Is that considered an even? So let's discuss not that sugya. We'll discuss the sugya generally in the Gemara. Halfway down Chav Beis and Beis, we're going to go to the top of the page and then we'll stop. Should be just a few more minutes. Gufa. We had learned on the previous Amud. Rav Ikla Labavul b'Tainis Tzibur. I'm not going to repeat all the details. He went there for a Tainis Tzibur. Kam Kara B'Sifra. There was laning. Pasach Baruch. He started with an opening bracha and Chasam V'lo Baruch at the end. He didn't make a bracha afterwards. And then what did the Gemara say about Rav? That Nafal Kule Alma An Paihu. Everyone in the room prostrated themselves on the floor. But Rav, he stood there. Rav Lo Nafal Alan Pei. He didn't fall on his face. So says the Gemara, why? My time, a Rav Lo Nafil Alape. We have a halacha called Lo Siskodedu. That you're not allowed to losas agudos. You're not allowed to have different groupings in the room. So the poskim discussed taka by nefilas apayim. My son put on tefillin Baruch Hashem for the first time. He's like, what do I do with nefilas apayim? It's machlokas between the Gra and the Mishnah Brura. The Gra felt that you should still put your head down on the left side. It's not a bizayon to the tefillin. It's not at all. However, the Mishnah Brura says because of lo sasu agudos, you should never put your head down on your left arm. It is a bizayon, and everyone should do the same thing. So in that room, everyone should be putting their heads down on the hand that doesn't wear their tefillin. That's what the discussion is. So, but you can't stand out and not do tachanun at all. That's not right. So says the Gemara, because what was Rav's concern? Ritzba shelavanim haisa. The floor in front of him was made out of stone. Vitanya, we have a brisa ve'evan maskis lo sitnu ba'artzachem lishtachavos aleh. That the Evan Maskis, this slab of rock, you're not allowed to bow down on it in your lands. What's the diuk in the brisa? It's correct that in general you're not allowed to do that in your land. But there's no problem of prostrating oneself in the Beis Hamikdash, and this is Kidei Ula. The Amar Ula lo asra Torah le'ritzba shalavanim bilvad. The only time there's a problematic is when that the Isser of Evan Maskis applies of kneeling down on stone is when you are in your own land, but in the Beis Hamikdash it's permissible. It says the Gemara, Ihachi, if Rav's concern was Evan Maskis, my ear Rav, if the floor of that Beis Hamedrash where he was davening was made out of stone, it's not only Rav's problem of Evan Maskis, it's everybody's problem of Evan Maskis. How can anyone be Mishtachave? So the Gemara says, "Afilu kulu nami." They all have the same problems. You can't do that. Only in the Beis Hamikdash says that mutter. It's an Isser D'oraisa. So says the Gemara, 3/4 of the way down. No. Just Kame de Rav Havoy. Just the carpet was missing right in front of him, and just by him it was Evan Maskis, so he didn't want to bow down. Says the Gemara, I mean, seriously, move over. V'leza lagabe tzibura, move over to where everybody else is. V'lin pol alape, do what everybody else is doing. You can't move respectfully. You can't move over 2 feet to fulfill a halacha. Go move over 2 feet. We walk miles and miles and miles to fulfill halacha. To wash netilas yadayim mayim rishonim, you have to walk 3 mil. In order to wash mayim achronim, you have to walk 1 mil. We walk very far. You can't walk 2 feet to do tachanun. What's the problem? So says the Gemara, no. Lo bay lemitrach tzibura. Rav knows the way these things work. You don't want every time the Rav gets up, everybody's stared, everybody has to stand up, they're distracted. It's sircha de tzibura. Some say no, Rav had a different problem, that he did a different type of nefilas apayim that they did. They were kneeling down with their faces to the ground, but he did pishut yadayim v'raglayim hava avid. It is the model of the belly flop on the floor, totally flat and prostrated out on the ground. And that's what he did. So he didn't, and Rashi discusses this, but it's uchedeula. What was the concern about that? To Amar Ula, lo asra Torah, ela pishut yadayim v'raglayim bilvad. When it comes to Evan Maskis, so that the Isser of Evan Maskis is not just kneeling down on it, it's pishut yadayim v'raglayim. So Rav's minhag for nefilas apayim was pishut yadayim v'raglayim. And that is taka the Isser of Evan Maskis when you do that. So says the Gemara, great. Do what everyone else in the room was doing. They weren't doing this kind of nefilas apayim. That was just Rav. Do what everybody else is doing. Put your head on the floor. Just don't lie out like everybody else. So it says the Gemara, he wasn't willing to do that because lo meshani mimin hage. That's my minhag. I don't do that. So therefore he didn't do it. V'bay sema adam chashuv shiny. Some people say that if you know of yourself that you're an Adam Chashuv, then the halacha is different. And this is something that we learned as well in Maseches Tainis. The Gemara says, last short line, Kid Rabbi Elazar. We see that when a person wants to prostrate themselves before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they are not allowed to do so if they are a Chashuv person, unless they know that their tefillos will be answered like Yehoshua, Dichsi. We're not going to go into the details, but this was the pasuk that was quoted in the Gemara in Tainus as well. Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua kumlech v'gomer. So says the Gemara, we therefore see that that he was not willing to lie on the ground. Even though the Evan Maskis applied in theory to everyone, it didn't apply it to everyone because they weren't doing the same Ishtach Havaya that he was, but he wouldn't change his minhag to theirs because it's his minhag. So he was stuck. He had no other choice. So he didn't do it at all. He didn't do any nefilas apayim. Then the Gemara goes into an explanation, 7 lines from the bottom, from Chav Beis Amud Aleph, into the various versions of bowing. Tanu Rabbanan, what's Kida? Kida is al apayim, it's on your face. And Emar Batikod Basheba apayim aretz. What's Kriya? Kriya is al birkaim, that's on one's knees. V'cheinu omer michrua al birkav. What's ishtachava? Zo pishut yadayim v'raglayim, legs out, feet out. Shneimar havon avo ani v'imecha ve'achecha lishtachavo slecha arza. That we will lie down. This is the story of Yosef, of course, lying down flat on the ground. This is the third time I think we've seen this story. At least the third time. Says the Gemara, Levi, the Amora, achve kida kame de Rebbe. He was showing what Kida was for Rebbe, was showing Rebbe what it was, V'itla, and he got injured. Levi was one of the authors of the Tosefta. Levi and Bar Kapar were also super early Amoraim, and they authored the organized version of the Tosefta. If you look in the back and you see the Tosefta, that was organized by Levi and Bar Kapar. So he got injured trying to show Rebbe what this Kida looked like. So according to some of the Rishonim, the Kida was where you basically bow down and your face is on the ground, and you'd support yourself with your thumbs in some particular way. It's very hard to understand what everybody means.
Feet around the ground,
I don't know. It's not clear. It's not clear. It's not. But the Rishonim in Tainus, when it described it, didn't say anything about your feet being off the ground. I don't recall.
But it did say the thumbs.
Thumbs were supporting you.
So
your thumbs are standing.
Right,
You're doing more than doing a push-up. You're holding up your whole body on your thumbs with your face on the ground as the tripod. I don't know. I wouldn't have thought. I don't know. Anyways, he got injured. Says the Gemara, he didn't get injured because of that. This is what hurt him. That's not what happened. We saw in Maseches Tainis that he was a little sharp at the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Wow, whatever the story was over there. So says the Gemara, we see that what injured him was that he said something disrespectful to Hashem. It wasn't because of the Kida. So says the Gemara, Hava Hagar Mala. He had two things going for him in the negative, and two negatives is bad. In this case, they don't make a positive. Says the Gemara, Amr B'chia Bar Avin Chazina Lehu L'Abaye V'Rava Tematzle Atzluya. That when it comes to Tachanun, we see that when it comes to Abaye and Rava, we're already 4th century in the Amoraim, so we're like 100 years later than Rav. We see here that they were matzle atzluye when it came to tachanun, when it came to nefilas apayim. Take a look at Rashi. Dibra maschal atzle atzluye al tzidein, on their sides. V'lo noflan al pneihen mamish. They were not able to fall on their face. This was the compromise. Lefi she'ein adam chashuv r'shai lipol al panav. If you feel all self-righteous one day and you're like, today is the day for Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim, and in fact, you're a Chashuv Yid, you're a Rav, you're a Posek, it's usher, you're not allowed to do that. A regular person is allowed to do that. All of us are allowed to do that. But if you're a posek of the community and people turn to you, you're not allowed to do that. That's not allowed. And this is the balance that led us to where we are now with Nefilas Apayim, according to some of the Meforshim. That's the track that we're running here. We'll stop right here on the top of Chav Gimel. We'll pick up tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.